All right. Well, welcome everyone to our monthly customer brown bag session here at Sumo Logic. My name is Lisa Carnes. I am a customer success program manager here, and I'm going to get things kicked off for us. So for those of you who are new to joining our sessions, we provide these once a month on the fourth Thursday of each month, and each session will focus on a certain topic for Sumo. And so for this month's session, I'm actually very excited because I took a look at what is the most common customer support case that we get. And the greater theme around it is around collection. So then I met with some of our engineers and people on our support team to get a deeper dive on what about collection is specifically the questions or the issues that customers are going through. So today I'm really excited to have one of our senior open source engineers, Mikolaj. He's going to talk about our questions around Kubernetes Helm chart upgrades. And for this session specifically, if this is something that hits close to home to you, and this is something you go through a lot, or hopefully not a lot, but please ask questions. Please pause, raise your hand, or put them in the chat. We have the Q&A windows open. You can also chat as well your question, and we can take a pause and answer that. So today is a great day to just help you feel more comfortable around all of your Kubernetes collection questions. So without further ado, I'll kick it off to you. Go ahead, Mikolaj. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So now I'm up. So for everyone joining this session, my name is Mikolaj. I am the source of much of the pain that you have felt upgrading the Helm chart or trying to. And I am here to maybe not necessarily even talk in detail about how the upgrades are supposed to go, because we have documentation for that. I am here to explain why these exist in the first place and where are we heading, what are we doing, what is the broader context of what's going on, why are we changing it in the first place? Like, if it worked for you, I'm sure you've asked yourself that question more than once. So this is my short agenda for this presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about Helm and about the Helm chart. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And I'm going to talk about what changed in the major versions of the Helm chart and why. This is a bit of a spoiler, but it's going to have to do with OpenTelemetry and OpenTelemetry collector. And then I'm going to address some common migration pains, what you can expect when you're going from version 2 to version 3, and why that is potentially a problem and how you should think about going about these things. So without further ado, briefly, we use Helm. Helm is describes itself as a package manager for Kubernetes. And in my experience, this is a good description. Like many package managers, it is quite convenient for users and quite painful for package maintainers. But if you've used Kubernetes, you've probably used Helm. And if you haven't, at some point, you'll probably be forced to. Unfortunately, it is effectively a standard at this point, for better or ill. So what does Helm do? It has software packages. In particular, the Sumo Helm chart is fairly complicated, but there are simpler things out there as well. If you want to install some database or something like an ingress controller, or even kind of more infrastructural things like a metrics server, you're going to have a Helm chart for it. So what does Helm do? It installs the application. It manages upgrades for you. It has a notion of a release that is installed and which has some state. It has a consistent configuration format. So generally speaking, the actual configuration options, of course, differ between packages, but the format is always the same, and there's some idea of how to do dependencies in there. And once you're familiar with it, you'll continue to be familiar with it. And it actually tries to hide implementation details. There is an alternative way of installing software in Kubernetes. The big alternative is Customize, which is much more raw and closer to what the kind of manifests that Kubernetes runs on. And it tends to be simpler conceptually, but it doesn't hide implementation details at all. You have to care about all of them. Whereas with Helm, you can conceivably use it without knowing what resources it's creating under the hood. A lot of the time that works reasonably well. And it is in effect a standard. If there's some software somebody is shipping, there is going to be a Helm chart for it if it's intended to be installed in Kubernetes. And also, we at Sumo ship our Kubernetes collection solution for as a Helm chart, which is open source. You can go and read the codes. It's in Sumo's GitHub org, and if you go in there, it's actually, I believe, one of the pinned projects. You don't have to care about this, but it's if you ever find yourself curious how something is implemented or why it works in a particular way, it's actually possible to learn that by reading the templates if you are brave enough to read those. We support logs, metrics, and traces, so all the observability data and also Kubernetes events, with some limited support for security-specific events via Falco, but I'm not going to talk about that very much here. Documentation is hosted now on help.sumo.com, and I mentioned this because this used to not be the case completely. It used to be hosted just in the GitHub repository. So now it's on help.sumo.com. If you want to know something, just go in there, search for Kubernetes Helm chart, and you're going to find what you need. And we follow semantic versioning. So when we make breaking changes, we actually bump the major version. This happens. There's no set cadence for the major releases, but historically it has happened around once per year. And it's probably going to be, it's going to happen less in the future. And finally, this is like a pretty big Helm chart doing things, and it uses different agent applications under the hood. If you are lucky, you won't have to care about what those are, but a lot of this, a lot of the content of this talk here is about which agent applications and why are we switching from one to the other. And yeah, so I have a slide here about how the evolution across major versions went, but I'm first going to skip ahead a little bit. So I have these three graphs over here. So this is version 2 of the Helm chart, and it illustrates which agents are being used. So, and actually it's a little bit incomplete because the enrichment layer over here should also be fluentd, but that shouldn't stop us from looking at it. So we have logs are collected using fluentbit, enriched by fluentd. Events are collected by fluentd and enriched by fluentd. Then metrics are collected by Prometheus. And traces are collected using the OpenTelemetry collector. And then that goes to Sumo. So you might look at this and say, man, that's quite a few agents in here, and quite a few different agents in different technologies with different behaviors potentially. And that is actually one of the major reasons we started making changes. So I'm gonna skip into the future a little bit here. So in version 2, we've had this. In version 3, the logs and events are now collected by the OpenTelemetry collector, and enrichment is also done by the OpenTelemetry collector. So the only things left here is Prometheus and also Falco, but like I said, I'm going to ignore that for now. And in version 4, we're almost completely OpenTelemetry native. I'm not going to go into very deep detail about what that actually means and what is left that is not OpenTelemetry native, but if somebody is interested, you can ask a question. And if we have time, I'll elaborate a little bit. But the trajectory here is, I think, visually pretty obvious. We are going towards OpenTelemetry and using OpenTelemetry collector. So now going back here. So yes, to OpenTelemetry collector. Why? A big reason from our perspective is that having a lot of different agents is difficult for us because we have to be experts on all of these agents. You can hit all sorts of different problems, including performance problems or strange behaviors in the agents. All the agents have their own peculiar bugs, as some of you have no doubt found out using it. So we wanted to use an agent that we were actual experts on, and we are experts on the OpenTelemetry collector. We are upstream contributors. We have our own distribution of it. We know the stuff, and if something comes up, we either know what this is and whether it's already fixed upstream, or we can go fix it ourselves. So this is like a big thing for us. In particular, FluentBit is a very difficult application for a lot of reasons to support. And in particular for Prometheus is kind of a big cannon, where we use just a small amount of its capabilities, but we pay all the, and you pay all the operational and scaling costs of running Prometheus in your cluster, especially as your data volume increases. So that was there's an operational reason to get rid of it. But there's a very big benefit to just having a single agent for everything. And part of it is that it's simpler. Once problems are fixed, they're fixed in one place and they're gone. And there's also a security benefit, because in particular, like for example, FluentD or FluentBit are applications more kind of built in a kind of older style, where, for example, FluentBit loves to have shared libraries for all sorts of things. And then if you run some kind of security scanner on your cluster, which an increasing amount of users do, you'll find that it will flag some out-of-date dependency that is probably not used, but it's a major pain to get exceptions for it. And this has produced a lot of this generates a lot of kind of maintenance effort. Whereas the auto collector is a statically compiled Golang application, it tends to be much better in this. It generates much less. In particular, we recently had a pretty impactful FluentBit CVE, for example, whereas I don't remember the last CVE specifically in the auto collector. So it's also less effort in that sense. And finally, OTel is becoming a standard for observability. And if you let me skip again to the following slide. So we believe in OTel at Sumo. We believe it's going to be a standard, and that it's going to, much like Kubernetes became a standard, that is that at some point, if you want to do something similar to what Kubernetes does, you effectively use Kubernetes, and you can expect people to know Kubernetes, so you don't have to teach them your infrastructure. The same thing we believe is going to happen in observability, and our hope, at least, is going to be that if you learn a little bit about the OpenTelemetry and OpenTelemetry collector, then you will be able to use that knowledge elsewhere in the future, the same way it is with Kubernetes as a platform, and vice versa. You're going to have new people coming in, and they will already know, and they will already be able to jump in and not have to learn some specific other agents that you have. And there's also other benefits to the auto collector. I'm going to talk a little bit about the specifics of what scalability, reliability, and performance mean in this specific case. And there's also the fact that you can actually send OpenTelemetry formatted data to Sumo directly, and that lets you do some things that other methods of ingestion don't let you do, because the data is highly structured. And I actually note that I have a typo here, because it says OLTP, or it should say OTLP. That is just the OpenTelemetry line protocol. It's data formatted for OpenTelemetry. So yeah, all these benefits, right? I don't know, but it makes me happy looking at these. It makes me happy looking at these graphs, at how I had so many things and now I only have one thing. And I can talk about the abstract benefits, but in a practical sense, right, you have to upgrade from one to the other. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about how that looks, what it means. So this has all been context. This has all been context. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? We are exchanging agents for different agents and trying to make this as painless as possible. But there is some pain, and I'm going to address some of the pain here. So if you're migrating between major versions, and this is what semantic versioning means. If you're migrating from a minor release to a minor release, or just upgrading to a minor release, you can do it and not be afraid of any breakage. If you're migrating between major versions, you can expect some breakage, and you should read to begin with, you should read the migration guide. The migration guides are available at help.sumologic.com. If you are doing this upgrade, that is the first thing that you should do. Again, we support upgrades one major version at a time. Right now, we have version 2, version 3, and version 4. So you can go one at a time. Do not try to jump both. You will regret it. And if you come to us asking for help, we will tell you just go one at a time. Generally speaking, the V2 to the V3 migration is the largest, and you can see this looking at these graphs. Whereas this one just replaces Prometheus and is much more localized and barely affects anything other than metrics. And yeah, generally speaking, if you're going from V3 to 4, you shouldn't. If you're not ingesting metrics, it shouldn't matter to you at all. And if you are, it probably won't matter. So a little bit specifically. So this is the big painful migration from version 2 to version 3. We've written a migration program. It is mentioned, the migration guide tells you how to use it. I'm calling it out here because you might be surprised, but there's a migration format that will rewrite your configuration and make any changes that can be done automatically. There's an upgrade of Kubernetes stack, which requires you to, if you have metrics enabled, requires you to run some commands which are pretty trivial, but for technical reasons, Helm cannot do it on its own. Then here in this metadata layer, if you have custom processing written in FluentBit or FluentD, you will have to port that to the OpenTelemetry collector. And this is unfortunately something that is very difficult to write a generic guide for, because the space of these customizations is really large. We don't really know what you're doing. The best way to approach it is to, instead of trying to translate from one to the other, is to conceptualize it and say our customizations are doing A, B, and C. And then ask yourself, how do we do A, B, and C in OTel? There is documentation for that on our help site about how to do data processing using OTel. And if you try to do it and are confused and can't make it work, open a support ticket and we will help you. This is the most painful. This is one of the most painful changes in this whole presentation that we've done, and we tried to do better, but it was unfortunately we couldn't get. We even tried to do a fully automated solution here, but it was just not very feasible to do, unfortunately. And the second painful thing is we are replacing the log collector agent here. Here it's FluentBit, and here is the OTel collector. This is technically something of a fraught process. And the reason for it, and I think I wasn't sure if I was going to do it, but I think I will. Let me show. This is actually an image from our documentation. So this image illustrates how log collection in Kubernetes is architected in general. And I'm talking about this little bit. So what happens is you have this log collector agent running on a node and reading logs directly from the node disk. And this log collector agent has some state. It keeps track of which logs it already read and which it hasn't. for obviously, because it can be restarted, and after it restarted, it needs to resume from the same point that it was already at. And if you're switching agents, if you have Fluent Bit and you're replacing it with the autocollector, the state is not compatible. So autocollector cannot read Fluent's bit state and say, oh, okay, so I just start from here. They're not compatible. So there's there are several ways you can deal with it. You can so if you do this naively, you can potentially suffer data loss in that if you delete Fluent bit and then install the autocollector, it's possible that some logs you will not be able to see, because in the time period between you deleting Fluent bit and installing autocollector, those logs will just get rotated and they won't be available anymore. So if you're okay with that, that's good. You don't have to do anything. If you're not okay with it, there's some options. You can run both of them simultaneously, and the migration guide says how to do it. If you run both of them simultaneously, you will have double ingestion for like some short period of time. So basically what you do is you upgrade to v3, say run both at a time. And once they're both running, you turn off Fluent bit and then you're okay. You haven't missed anything, but you've ingested some duplicates. And the third option is something like you scope both of these to different node groups and just rotate all the nodes in your cluster slowly. And that is probably the most elegant way of doing it. But it's not everyone is like very comfortable with rotating all the nodes in their cluster. So if you can do that, and if you're comfortable with it, that's probably the best way of doing it. But other than that, you might consider the other options. A migration guide explains how to do any three of these. But that's all of it. And again, in v3 to v4, the only real change is that we're changing Prometheus to the OpenTelemetry collector. And this change is largely transparent, as in the OpenTelemetry collector does the same work as Prometheus, but it doesn't do all the work Prometheus would normally be doing, and therefore it's more efficient. It can do things like auto scaling, which is to me as amazing. Prometheus is like a monolithic thing that you can theoretically shard, but you can't automatically scale based on load. You can only strictly set how many shards you want, and that is not such an easy process. So if you were ever lamenting the fact that you can't scale Prometheus, well, here you just kind of install it and it works out of the box and you don't have to do anything. With that said, there are some things that go away. There is such a thing as remote write relabeling in Prometheus, and this doesn't exist in Auto. So if you had some regular expressions in there, you have to move those regular expressions to a different place. But other than that, nothing changes. And somewhat more importantly, and this is unfortunately a little bit painful, some aggregations are impossible now. In Prometheus, you can do aggregations because there's a single database of all the metrics, and you can do any aggregation on those that you want. In OTel, you don't have that. Normally, the suggestion is to do those aggregations in Sumo itself. There is some ability to do aggregations in the agent, but you can only do them locally, so to speak. So for example, if you're getting CPU metrics about a node, you can sum and aggregate those metrics from that given node, for example, but you cannot do anything, for example, across time. You cannot do aggregation that spans the last 5 minutes of data points in a time series, let's say. Oh, and finally, so here, this is not actually shown on these, but this line to Sumo in version 4, this line going to Sumo here uses the OpenTelemetry protocol. And that might not matter to you. To some extent, it's an implementation detail, but in practice, this is just more performant and nicer. So the agents are going to be faster. They're going to use less memory, and some really annoying use cases, for example, which were in V2 and V3, had to do with for example, multi-line log merging are now painless in this version 4 because of the new protocol. And yeah, but I am pointing this out here because the way this is done is that we create new sources in Sumo and send data to those new sources. So I am pointing it out. The data is going to look the same, but there is a certain, actually there's two attributes, two built-in attributes of that data, which are going to be different afterwards. So before you upgrade, and this is also in the migration guide, please make sure that you're not using these in queries. You should not be using them in queries anyway. It is highly not recommended to do it in general. Mostly because of these kinds of problems that you can run in, but it is something to take note. And finally, V4 is where we are right now. So, but what's in the future is my final bit over here. And so, in all of these migrations, we've preserved the old behavior as an option. So what I mean is that in version 2, this is the default that I'm showing, but auto was available as an option. In here, auto is the default, but this state is available as an option. And the same way going from V3 to V4. You can use Prometheus for metric collection in V4. It's an option. And that's generally how it goes. We don't remove things immediately. We keep them around as options in case you have some requirements or you want to migrate, but you want to keep the current thing and then do things in smaller steps, which is always a good idea. Then this is possible. But in version 5, Prometheus disappears. So we only have auto. There may be some breaking changes due to dependencies. This is something that is somewhat beyond our control. Like if we try to keep dependencies up to date, if something like Falco makes a breaking change release, then we push that back until we do our own breaking change release and then document that if you're using Falco, then you have to do it and similar things. But we have less and less external dependencies with every version here. So this should be much less of a problem. And finally, I put a point here about something called a node agent. So if you look at this architecture, you might note that there's a lot of stuff in here. There's an auto collector to do this and do that and do that. And then for enrichment, there's also an auto collector. And you might, if you install this and enable everything, it's like, we have a lot of auto collectors in here. It's supposed to be an agent, the same agent for all signal types. Why can't we have just one to do everything? And the answer is yes, that we can, but we don't want to make too many changes in a single release. So something that we'll probably be heading towards is what I call a node agent model here, by which I mean that this enrichment layer might disappear optionally. Like it will be something that you can enable optionally if you want to. There are like benefits and there's upsides and downsides of doing things this way. And we are going to merge all of these into a single agent that's going to get to just run as a single daemon set in your cluster. It's going to collect all this data and it's going to send it directly to Sumo without need of any layer in between, any gateway layer, let's call it, in between. So, and we think this is going to be a better fit for at least for a lot of smaller and medium clusters without complicated needs. Like this is an architecture that is better for large clusters where you want to have good scaling characteristics, and scaling is easier if you have this separate enrichment layer. But for smaller and medium clusters, it's usually, we think now, it's better to have a single thing that maybe doesn't scale as smoothly, but is much simpler to understand. And there's less of it in general. And yeah, that's all I got. Thanks everyone for listening, putting up with this long-winded explanation. And now I'd like to take questions. I would love to get some questions.
Yes, so we have one. It is if we've migrated from V2 to V3 to V4, is it safe to delete the HTTP sources now that it's using OTLP sources? Are there some that are safe to remove, but others that should be kept?
You can remove them. It's not a problem. Be aware that if you remove them directly in Sumo, they'll reappear on your next release because they are generated automatically by a setup job that runs as you upgrade the Helm chart. So if you want to delete them, you have to do it in the Helm chart configuration. This is not a problem. You can do it. If you delete them, you won't be able to switch back to HTTP. The current state with HTTP sources, no TLP sources, is the way it is because so it's easier to switch. And that's in our minds, that option is more important than cleaning this up. But in version 5, I haven't put this in here, but we're probably going to get rid of the HTTP sources anyway. So you can also just wait until we do it. But it's safe, is the general answer.
Great. Okay. Next one. Well, actually, I'll ask one that was in the very beginning. Do we publish customized manifests?
No, that is a pretty big question. I think. Manifests of what? Is this a question about specific configurations of the Helm chart? Is it about documentation?
Yeah, it was asked when you were going over what is Helm.
Okay. So it's about customized manifests, I think. The answer is no. Right now we can't, but we would like to in the future. The reason why we can't right now is that I won't be able to show this here, I think. The reason we can't right now is that we depend on the setup job to set things up in Sumo. And with customized manifests, this is difficult to do. In customized manifests, we would like to do it eventually, and we'd like to do it in such a way that there's no need for a setup job, and then we just put in an API key or installation token, it's called right now. You just put that in there, and then you get collectors as a daemon set in your cluster, and each collector registers with Sumo individually, and that's how it works. That's how we would like to get it working in the future, and then we could use customize. But right now we are dependent on this setup part, and honestly, we probably couldn't reproduce the Helm chart in a customized manifest anyway. When that starts existing, it's going to be its own kind of separate, much simpler thing for simpler use cases.
Great, thank you. And then the next question, for the node agent default, you mentioned that you're moving toward the all-in-one agent sort of method, but will there be a switch to run the components from the Helm chart directly?
I'm not sure if I fully understand that question, but I will say that when I say the node agent to the node agent model by default, I mean that this is still going to be available, if that's the question that we're asking. Like the more complicated model is still going to be available. It's just not going to be the default. And the question of if I'm on the node agent model and I want to switch to the other model, how does that work is somewhat open right now, but we would like to do the node agent model as a default because generally speaking, we just think it's the better default for most users. But you will be able to switch to the more complex model if that's what you want, or you'll be able to stay with what you currently have. It's probably going to be something quite separate in the Helm chart. There's not going to be a lot of mixing between the two. You either have one or the other with their separate settings largely.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. I'm seeing some of my spans being dropped for various reasons. For example, in the Sumo Logic Systems Events Index, I can see the message drop span because it is duplicated. Are those spans being dropped by the OTel collector or when they are ingested into Sumo Logic?
I believe the latter, but I am not really an expert on this, and I don't know off the top of my head. But I think if you see it in that index, it should be dropped by Sumo. And there's some reasons to get there's various reasons you can get duplicate spans. If you'd like to investigate this further, please open a customer support ticket and we'll look at it and try and figure it out.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, any other questions from the group? These are great questions, by the way. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent, I agree. This is way better than I could have ever hoped for.
We'll give it another minute if anyone is typing a question. Oh, what is the timeline for V5 Helm chart?
Sometime before the end of this year. Provisionally sometime around the end, either by I'm not going to say December because that's an awful month to release anything, but it might be November or it might be January, I think.
Okay, we'll give it another minute again. Okay, last call for questions. Okay, I think that probably sums it up then. So I'll go ahead and stop recording.